Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this week's first edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight...
You have a renewed ANC led by criminals. What is that?
Our country's problems are too big for a president who is busy hustling on the side.
I'm not in a position to be the one, making a moral judgment on this question.
All the president's views will reflect on a week in which the current and former presidents all spoke about the country's numerous problems, but with none of them taking responsibility for their respective roles in the state the nation is in. And you can join the conversation by sending us your comments. The Twitter handles are on your screen. The Watchdog starts now. It hasn't happened before, well, certainly not in post-apartheid South Africa, where heads of state, current and former, get to speak elaborately on problems facing the country. And that's what incumbent Cyril Ramaphosa did last night in a special address to the nation. Thabo Mbeki on Saturday night addressing a leading think tank. Jacob Zuma earlier that day speaking during a special media briefing that he called, and Kgalema Motlanthe on Friday opening a dialogue conference that he hosted. They all got South Africans talking, and tonight on the program we pick up on some of the talking points the president's speeches have generated. And to help us navigate the issues, I'm joined by independent political analyst Asanda Ngwasheng, UNISA political science professor Dirk Kotze, as well as think tank Rivonia Circle director Tessa Dooms. Evening to all of you, and thank you for your time.
Good evening, thank you.
Well, to get us going, here's our senior political reporter, and that's Samkele Maseko.
Let's be honest and be frank, what some of them said is not worth reflecting on, if we're being frank.
A weekend of political missiles directed at the under-fire South African and ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa. The former heads of state and ANC presidents, along with the former ANC Deputy President Motlanthe, decried the battering of the ANC image due to the sustained allegations relating to the millions of dollars allegedly stolen at the president's farm. Mbeki says the ANC cannot ignore the independent parliamentary inquiry into the revelations of the Phala incident and the political ramifications it could have for the ANC and the president.
But I'm saying you put out a notion like that, coming from this team of senior lawyers, all of them are lawyers, and they say we've looked at what we have, what we can, and it seems to us there's a case to answer. The leadership of the ANC cannot avoid meeting to discuss the question. In the light of that, what do we do? Do we say to the president he must step aside? Or do we say no? Let it continue through the courts, through the parliamentary process. What's the impact of that on the ANC in the public mind?
Once allies, now turned foes, Zuma and Ramaphosa have reached a point of no return. Zuma has labeled Ramaphosa as corrupt and having committed treason.
The president is corrupt, yet the busybodies and self-appointed anti-corruption crusaders and NGOs are dead silent. Your president has committed treason.
Politically in the ANC, the party's three biggest provinces, KZN, Limpopo and the Eastern Cape, have defended Ramaphosa. These provinces have labelled the former president's conduct as destructive and devoid of the culture of the ANC.
These challenges are not new. They are not for this current leadership, including the current president. Challenges that ANC has been inheriting over years. So we should take collective responsibility to a certain extent and see how best are we finding panacea to address sort of these problems. So I don't think that is going the correct way. What we have just observed over the last 24 hours is very unfortunate, actually destructive, really bordering onto something that we should not really witness as the younger generation of the ANC.
President Ramaphosa's spokesperson Vincent Magwenya has cautioned the former presidents not to shout at the incumbent from rooftops, but rather to approach him directly.
When criticism is shouted from different quarters in public, it doesn't have much of an impact. What will have an impact and be helpful is for them to use their influence and their access to him to say, colleague, comrade, we think you are erring on this side, or we think you should be approaching matters this way. But to stand in rooftops and shout at him is not really constructive. He remains hard at work. He remains very much focused. He's not going to be distracted by criticism. He understands that in his role, criticism is par for course, so that's not going to make him lose sleep at night. Other issues will be dealt as we go.
Ramaphosa faces political turbulence ahead of the ANC's 55th National Conference in December, where he is seeking re-election as party president. He is yet to respond to his predecessor's criticism. The National Working Committee is meeting, which may deliberate on the matters raised by the former presidents. Samkele Masego, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, let's go to our panelists for this evening. Lots to talk about just from that package that Samkele Maseko prepared. But of course, there's a whole host of other issues that were not part of that package. But I want us to start there, starting with you, Sanda. I mean, if I may, there have been lots of comments, criticisms, discussion, debates about whether these presidents, or maybe one should say the other former presidents, whether they had directed their criticism at Cyril Ramaphosa, or these were broad comments. I mean, you may have seen that the organization Thabo Mbeki addressed on Saturday was quick to say, look, I mean, these were not criticisms leveled at Cyril Ramaphosa. He was looking broadly at the political situation in the country and really spared no one. Your thoughts? Please unmute.
Are you unable to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, so I think it's both. I think that, there were some criticisms that were specifically targeted at Cyril Ramaphosa, but I think there were some criticisms that were about general leadership in the ANC. And I think, we are lucky as a country to have former presidents. And I said a lot about Jacob Zuma, and I'll get to that in a moment. But we are lucky to have former presidents who are finally giving us an honest appraisal of what is happening in the ANC and what it means for the nation that is called South Africa. And what we have not had in the past is that former presidents have not always been honest. ANC people have always rallied around each other and not been honest about, the fractures within the ANC, have not been honest about the dilapidation of governance, the dilapidation of institutions that are meant to keep this country called South Africa going. And what we are seeing now is that it feels like there's a sense in which many people, particularly the former presidents, but every other person that you speak to, and I've spoken to many people across the range of South Africa, and everybody seems to be done with hiding, the black spots of the ANC or the ugly of the ANC, and everybody is interested in evaluating, rethinking, and bringing about, the South Africa that we all are keen to have, we all want, and the South Africa that we all want to build. And because of that, there is a vested interest wherein people have stopped protecting people, wherein people have stopped, saying the right things for the sake of saying the right things and protecting the party. And for me, what these former presidents have said is laid bare the fact that the ANC is a runaway train and nobody, including some of the most powerful people in this political party, is able to stop it from being hijacked by vultures, from being hijacked by the corrupt, and from being hijacked by people that even people within the leadership of the ANC can very clearly see are not holding, the best interests of the party. One of the things that was very interesting was, for example, Thabo Mbeki reflecting on an NEC meeting where the electoral reform was being discussed, and how he couldn't understand how people didn't understand that you have to legislate in a way that is in the best interest of South Africa, even if it is in the worst interest of the ANC, because it is about the country and not the party. And if you match that to, for example, Jacob Zuma and his whole thing about, the ANC is bigger than the country, the ANC is bigger than the constitution, it becomes clear that the era of ANC people protecting each other and not being honest about the dire state that we are in has ended. And I think that's important.
Okay. Professor Kotza, from where you sit, as far as Thabo Mbeki's speech was all about, your thoughts?
Well, I think in the case of President Mbeki, he focused very much on the leadership and, by implication, the leadership of President Ramaphosa. And one of his statements is that there is no real leadership at the moment in the ANC. And then it refers to quite a number of matters, including this about the amendment of the Electoral Act. But I think what is behind this, from my interpretation side, is that President Mbeki, as well as the former President Kgalema Motlanthe, or Deputy President, I think they become very scared now about where the ANC is. In the past, there was enough of a buffer in terms of a majority that they had that they could work with, and still, so they don't have to speak out in public as almost a sign of desperation. But I think what we've seen with President Mbeki, and this is now more than the second time, he did it also with the funeral of Jesse Duarte, said more or less the same thing. So there's now a pattern developing from his side of saying, well, I want to speak out. I want to wake them up if they are not yet aware of these issues. And hopefully in terms of the weight that I carry within the ANC as a former president, that will ultimately start to count. And that some people will say, well, we have to now take initiative, even if it doesn't come from the top leadership of the ANC. That is different from President Zuma's approach. President Zuma is not about trying to rescue the ANC under the leadership of President Ramaphosa. For him, it is about a complete change in the leadership of the ANC, as well as a personal vendetta, I would say, the way in which he approached and criticized the Constitutional Court, the Zondo Commission, and the judiciary almost in general, which is not what President Mbeki has done. He has focused more on the leadership within the ANC and trying to galvanize almost the process of rescuing.
Well, Tessa, there are people who have since been saying, well, very rich coming from Thabo Mbeki because he was intolerant of dissent when he was the president of the ANC and of the country. But also he's got his fair share of mistakes, and he has contributed to the state that the ANC and the country is finding itself in. If you look at USCOM, for example, it was during his tenure that this utility was neglected in spite of reports after reports of predicting what we are finding ourselves in right now. Nothing was done to, make sure that Telkom is not in the bad shape that it is in today.
Well, I think what Asanda said earlier is probably the best place to start that response. I don't think that any of these presidents speaking up right now negates their role in getting here. And in fact, the Premier of the Eastern Cape in the earlier clip spoke about collective responsibility, which is something the ANC has spoken a lot. And so part of collective responsibility is also collectively trying to rectify things and the way forward. There's not much that they can do in terms of, particularly if you think about Mbeki and Mhlante, about the things they had done before. It would be great for them to sit down and honestly own up to each thing that they contributed and each thing their administrations contributed to. I think we are asking the same thing of President Jacob Zuma and the state capture process. But what is significant about these moments is the idea that the ANC is now going beyond sitting behind closed doors, trying to sort itself out and bringing these debates into the public arena. And it's important at a number of levels. Number one is that the ANC says it is a leader of society, and we have to ask it to take society into its confidence as the leader of society about the way that it functions, the way that it operates, and the way that it governs. And so that in itself is a win for democracy, because democracy requires engagement, deep disagreement, for us to be able to work through the things that we want to see and the things that we hope for and the ways in which we agree or disagree on those things. And the ANC's democratic centralism has become a way for the ANC to hide from debate within its own ranks, but within a conversation even with society. So, I mean, what the ANC decides in its own ranks is almost neither here nor there in terms of the way they operate. But in terms of their position as the governing party, we need a more open and honest conversation with society from the side of the ANC. And if these leaders are allowing for that, and these leaders are paving the way for a more open, more honest conversation between the governing party and society, we should actually appreciate that and say that this is the way that we actually start to have a meaningful conversation with this political party in a way that isn't reverent because of the past, in a way that doesn't shield anybody, including the current president, from any kinds of responsibilities, and in a way that allows everybody who needs to take collective responsibility to do so.
And I guess, I mean, former President Mbeki was illuminating that point, Tessa, when he said, I mean, in that package earlier, that was posing, the question, what if, the Phala Phala saga goes in a particular direction? What are the implications? And those are questions the ANC should be asking itself instead of those who are perhaps behind or supportive of the incumbent may want to defend him. But he went further, and this is something else that he said, which I think is also, illustrative or speaks to some of the questions the public is asking itself and questions that the ANC should actually confront. Take a listen.
You have a renewed ANC led by criminals. What is that? There was immediately after this, soon after the local government elections in November, somebody circulated what do you call those things, Phoebe? A clip from somebody who was talking. It was a podcast. And this comrade says, in Newcastle, it's an ANC comrade, in Newcastle we did not campaign for election in terms of the local government elections last year. We didn't. And he says there is a comrade, remember one of our people in Newcastle, very, very popular, will always be elected. The people love him. He did not campaign. The IFP approached us and said to us, please don't campaign. And we agreed with them. We didn't campaign. The reason we didn't campaign is because if we campaigned and won, we would put in authority in the leadership of the municipality people who are criminals. They are ANC, but they are our leaders. That's why we decided not to campaign. We said we can't. We can't campaign for the ANC to win, because the ANC to win in Newcastle means to put a criminal, say, in the leadership of the municipality. We can't do that. And a fellow is talking, he says, you know, these people of ours, comrades, who've been in charge of this municipality, they actually have on their payrolls Izinkabi. You know, these professional killers. They are paid monthly. So they are held in reserve, so that one day I'm going to say, go and kill so-and-so. They say they are actually paid by the municipality, our people, retainers.
No one can argue with that, Asanda, but there are people who do, or who have argued with what the former ANC president was raising there.
This is exactly what I was saying, that it's very obvious that we have an ANC that's a runaway train, and the people inside the ANC themselves are desperate to rein this train in, but are unable to, because it's gone, you know, it's a runaway train, so they can't catch it. And I think, you know, I've said this many times, that we have all watched the evolution of the ANC from being a political party that was a shining light for Black people in South Africa, in terms of leadership, in terms of integrity, in terms of values, to being this corrupt, unethical, unthinking, unfeeling, and disconnected from the people political party. And we have watched it as a public as much as the people internally within the ANC have watched it. And I'm beginning to feel and sense from the presidents, the various presidents saying the various things. And I think, you know, Prof. Kotier put it very, very well when he analyzed who did it for what reasons. Mm-hmm. But ultimately what it is that the ANC used to be a broad church of ideas and ideology that was able to debate and engage on these internally and come to a consensus and then report back the consensus to us. What this is demonstrating is that the ANC internally is no longer a place of debate, is no longer a place where ideas can be contested. And if you think about the idea that people have Izinkabi waiting on retainer, it tells you the level of intolerance of debate, the level of intolerance of critique, the level of intolerance of the idea and possibility of being removed from power, of a political organization that is democratically elected, meaning can also be removed through the same votes that they are put in place of. And I think one of the things that I applaud the presidents for is that they understand this principle about the ANC, which is something that people sometimes miss. You know, a lot of people ask, why is the ANC so popular, even though it's done all of these things and all of and everything in between? The ANC continues, and I have spent many, many hours talking about, you know, what's wrong with the ANC. But to this day, the ANC continues to be one of the few political parties in this country that has policies that are pro-Black, that has policies that at least attempt to bring us towards social inequity. What is the problem? The problem is that they don't implement those policies, and they are not honest about when they haven't implemented them, and they do not do the difficult work that is required to evaluate and to monitor those policies. And so one of the risks that we run, and I think it's important to highlight, I'm not saying we need to keep the ANC for this, but one of the risks that we run should we remove the ANC from power is that we are going to get the removal of policies like affirmative action, of policies like Black economic empowerment, and many other policies that remain, although flawed, in the best interests of what is required to bring about social equality in South Africa. And so we need to understand that the ANC operates outside of the 1 million membership. So if you look at numbers, even the kind of last past elections, you have an ANC that has members 1 million, but votes 10 million. Why is that? Most political parties are closer in terms of the numbers vis-a-vis the kind of votes that they get. But the ANC has the history of being able to continuously tap into, we liberated you from the movement, and we were supported by you even when we were banned and not actually allowed to be a political party. And they continuously tap into this. But what is happening is that ability to tap into that is reducing. And so I think that's why these former presidents have now taken the strategy of bringing the debate outside of the ANC, because they realize that the million people who are within the ANC are not enough in terms of numbers. And the space for debate in the ANC doesn't exist anymore. And so they're bringing it out to the public in order for the 10 million voters of the ANC to be able to have these engagements. But the thing that makes me sad is that this is too little, too late, as far as I'm concerned. It is a great thing. It's amazing. I applaud it, but it is simply too little, too late. They should have spoken sooner. They should have opened up the debate sooner, and they should have engaged voters much earlier than they have. They have allowed the ANC to be taken over by criminals, and they laughed at people who said the ANC was run by a bunch of criminals. And it's only now that they realize that the ANC really does face the reality of being decimated as a political party, that they are suddenly realizing we actually need to take this debate to the 10 million people who voted for us. We can no longer just have it as the 1 million.
Well, let's criminal number one, according to another former president, is the incumbent President Cyril Ramaphosa. I mean, take a listen. Let's take a look at some of the points that he raised at that briefing that he held on Saturday, putting forward or on the table his issues from his own perspective, and that's former President Jacob Zuma.
Interacting with the media for the first time since his incarceration, former President Jacob Zuma didn't hold back.
Your president has committed treason.
Zuma says President Ramaphosa has committed a crime. He accuses President Ramaphosa of corruption and says this is inconsistent with his oath of office.
No president should conduct private business while in office. It's not allowed. Our country's problems are too big for a president who is busy hustling on the side.
The former president also touched on the suspension of the public protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane. He questioned why was Mkhwebane suspended and alleged that it was a cover-up for the Phala Phala farm gate.
To add insult to injury, the Western Cape High Court has found that the president went further and suspended the public protector for the sole purpose of covering up his Phala Phala corruption.
And onto the Zondo Commission, Zuma has questioned the credibility of the inquiry. Zuma himself established the commission in January 2018. This after the High Court in Pretoria ordered that the public protector's remedial action was binding and that Zuma had to appoint a commission of inquiry within 30 days, headed by a judge selected solely by the then Chief Justice Mogoeng.
The commission, which had been unlawfully established, was itself being used by unelected leadership of the country to remove the true leaders of our liberation.
He also accuses Zondo of being biased when he appeared before the State Capture Commission and maintains that he and the Chief Justice know each other.
I'm saying Chief Justice is my friend.
is my relative, is my comrade.
And he maintains his arrest was unlawful.
The highest court in the land violated the law.
The former president completed his 15-month jail sentence 2 weeks ago.
So whilst all citizens enjoy this right, Jacob Zuma does not apply. Does this confirm a claim that in this country there are now Zuma laws?
He also weighed in on the ANC step-aside resolution. Zuma says the rule is unfair and inconsistent with the constitution of the country.
It's not right. It is undermining the right of people to participate in the ANC, in reality. It is also against the constitution of the country.
Meanwhile, the presidency was not available for comment. Ntlantla Khatlani, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Tessa, I don't know what you make of the whole range of issues that the former president raised, from the incumbent committing treason, his side hustles. Mkhwebane's suspension was all about covering up for Phala corruption. The Zondo inquiry was nothing but something to use to oust the by unelected people to oust leaders of the revolution. His own unrest was unlawful. There are Zuma laws and there are the country's laws. Step aside is a whole facade.
You know, President Jacob Zuma here raises issues that I think are important, and they also would be interesting, like he says with the Phala issue, to take to his own presidency and see if they were applied there, if we would have had better outcomes. So let's take what President Mbeki said and just combine it here for a moment. I do think that the ANC has to ask itself the question, if it is found, and actually at this point already with the allegations sitting in front of them with President Ramaphosa, and the things that President Ramaphosa has already admitted to, for example, keeping those millions of rands in his house for the period of time that he did, them not being declared to SARS, all of those kinds of things. If you already have these things on the table, what are you waiting for in order to take this seriously within the NEC and make a decision and make a pronouncement on what it means for the president? Because we had years and years and years of people making claims around Jacob Zuma, around the Guptas, around the deals that we now know to be true. And the ANC saying its consistent line, which is, well, people need to be proven guilty in a court of law first. And now they've taken it maybe a little bit step forward by saying people need to be charged in order to be dealt with. But the bigger question that they're not answering is, what are their own ethical and moral standards for leadership? And that's what both of these presidents are actually raising. And perhaps it could have been applied to them as well, which it wasn't. Is that the ANC keeps on saying that the law is the standard, which means they've abdicated their own responsibility to have a standard for good leadership within their own ranks. In fact, President Mbeki made an interesting point about an erstwhile comrade who, even just at the allegation that he had done something wrong, something that he denied completely. I think he was murder accused. He denied completely that he was in any way a part of that, but decided to step down from his role because he believed that just having the conversation in the public arena and him being attached to the ANC was not good for the ANC's brand and reputation. Yet you have an ANC who for over a decade has said, well, unless somebody has actually been found guilty of a criminal offense, the bar is low. We don't want to, rock our leadership and the balance of forces and all of those things unless somebody is found criminally guilty of something. And that means the ANC don't care about ethics. They don't care about morality. They don't care about leadership standards anymore. They just care about whether or not somebody has been found guilty to be a criminal. That standard makes the standard for leadership in this country far too low. And if that's the standard the ANC wants to have for itself, then that's fine. But we as the rest of society do not have to accept that as the standard for leadership, and the ANC must know that. The ANC must know that when we see leaders that do not do their jobs, that are incompetent, that don't take questions about very important issues. Pala Pala is an important issue in this country. To have a president accused of those things. I was in another country when that story broke, and that the headlines that were going about the president and he just refusing to answer questions about it made us look bad in an international platform. We must have a higher standard than the ANC has for itself when it comes to its leadership. Otherwise, we will continue to go through the cycle we went through with Jacob Zuma, the cycle that we've even gone through with somebody like Zweli Mkhize, who's going to be running for ANC presidency as well, and the cycle that we're going through now with the president, where until somebody's found guilty, they can pretend as if there's no standard for morality or ethical leadership other than criminal liability.
I don't know what you make, Prof, and I want us for a second to stick with what former President Zuma had to say about the incumbent, and that's President Cyril Ramaphosa, around him saying that President Ramaphosa has committed treason, that his hustles on the side are or shouldn't be allowed, and that the Mkhwebane suspension was all about covering up for his Pala Pala saga. And I want you, Prof, to also read it together as Tessa was saying, with what former President Mbeki had to say, that one of the key questions the ANC leadership in particular has to answer is, what happens if indeed the Pala Pala saga becomes overwhelming, and a question has to be raised, to be asked about what happens if indeed he has to face the music?
Yes, well, this is a very loaded question, but I will try. First of all, we all know that the process has already started in Parliament with what is generally referred to as an impeachment process, and it's now with the three legal panelists. But that, in a sense, is starting with commencing with a process that can give us some clarity on what happened and for what President Ramaphosa must account for. To say he has committed treason, I think, is going way overboard, because what he refers to about that the president is not allowed to receive remuneration, which means that he is not supposed to be employed in other contexts also, that can be dealt with in this impeachment process, but it's not yet at the point of treason. Treason is a much more serious and relatively well-defined crime across the board in many parts of the world, in many countries. I think what we have seen in the case of President Zuma, that is what I tried to say in the beginning, is the context and the purposes of their pronouncements are very different. They don't talk about the same thing. They don't criticize President Ramaphosa because of the state of the ANC. That is indeed, I think, what President Mbeki is doing, but not President Zuma. President Zuma is trying to revive the radical economic transformation narrative. I've said in another interview, he wants to create a counter-narrative for what President Ramaphosa has done during his time as president. Now, there's many things to criticize that about, but I think what President Zuma and others have realized is that the counter voice have become quiet and it has become fragmented. And with this statement on Saturday, it tried to bring it together, to give a voice again to a number of people that have become actually very quiet. Ace Magashule, Tony Yangeni, Lindiwe Sisulu has her own campaign. She's not actually part of this process. So it's not so much about a dialogue with President Ramaphosa. It's more a dialogue, more of a public dialogue with all of us and with those who you want to mobilize for the national conference at the end of the year.
But quickly, Prof, quickly, if one takes into account what some people have been saying, that the president ought to have taken the nation into his confidence. The fact that he's saying, leave this to processes, he's doing what pretty much everyone else who has been accused of wrongdoing has done. So how is his case different?
Well, I think the problem of President Ramaphosa is that it became a test about his integrity. It's not necessarily a test about whether it's criminal or not what happened there. It is about his relationship with the public. And it is the factor of trust. Even those who are not members or supporters of the ANC but see him as the national president of South Africa, I think are all very disappointed by the fact that he used a very technical approach to this and saying it must be investigated by the public protector and the walks and now even in Parliament, and he doesn't want to respond to it. I think the reason for that is he wants to, in a sense, in inverted commas, depoliticize the process. Because if he allows it to become a political debate where he is engaged on a day-to-day basis, he will possibly not be able to control it as much as he does at the moment. He doesn't fully control it, but he certainly controls it more than when there was an open debate in Parliament and the open debate within the ANC and other areas about this. Then he would have been, I would say, maybe a gone person already by now. So it's about survival from his side and seeing to what extent he can just reach the point of re-election and then approach it from a different point of view. But this is certainly the lowest point for him in terms of his career since the negotiations done.
Okay. If you just joined us, we're reflecting on a weekend in which the current and former presidents all spoke about the country's numerous problems. But among the questions we are asking is whether any of them actually took responsibility for their respective roles in the state that the nation is in. This conversation continues right after this.
Just 772 Rand a month to insure her Yaris? No wonder she's out on the town. When his insurer hiked his premium, he called us for a great deal. Just 556 Rand a month for his Jimny. And he's scoring by paying just 390 Rand a month to cover his Fiesta. SMS car to 44211 now to switch and save on your car insurance.
It's a penalty! Astonishing! Oh my word! That is quite something! One of the greatest results in their history. For the first time ever! Glorious! Glorious! Picture perfect! History in itself! It's a shoot! And in by Ronaldo! Sisonke together for the greatest game. Experience the glory of the FIFA World Cup on SABC Sport, 4 TV channels and 19 radio stations.
Welcome back, and remember you can join the conversation by sending us your comments. The Twitter handles are on your screen. Speaking of which, let's take a couple from people who have already sent through some. Edwin Mutsumi says, but we can't pretend like Mbeki didn't say ANC people hire hitmen in Gabi to kill their opponents. We really can't. If Cyril and people like Mbalula want to do anything, let them sue Zuma for defamation or slander. We all know they won't, cause they can't afford the only man to sing further. Well, this case is simple, says Mom of Action. Our constitution is clear. Members of the cabinet may not undertake any other work. Why are SAs not South Africans, I suppose, not understanding their constitution in this matter? Let's take a last one. Okay, we'll take more a little later. But I want us to go back now to go to what President Ramaphosa had to say last night. Of course, I mean, he was addressing the nation on how he intends, taking the recommendations of the State Capture Commission forward. And he spoke a lot about what has already been done, how he has tried to strengthen some of the state law enforcement agencies to make sure that they deal with the cases arising out of the report, and what he thinks needs to happen next. Take a listen.
A process for the appointment of boards of state-owned enterprises that is not open to manipulation. This would include the involvement of independent panels with appropriate technical expertise to recommend suitable candidates to the relevant minister. No board member will be allowed to be involved in procurement processes, as has happened during the state capture period, beyond playing an oversight role. Ministers will be prohibited from playing any role in procurement within state-owned enterprises or departments. The State Capture Commission recommended the establishment of a commission of inquiry into the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, PRASA, because the commission said it has an uneasy perception that there is much about the ills at PRASA that has not yet been uncovered.
President Ramaphosa last night talking about some of the things that are being done or have been done or in the process of being done to turn the situation around at SOEs. Now, as many people would recall, that's where a lot of the state capture actually happened. I mean, billions and billions of South African taxpayers' money was looted there. Decisions that were taken very questionable, very corrupt indeed, as we have heard. I mean, from while the state capture inquiry was sitting. I don't know, though, Asanda, whether in fact what the president had to say last night, with regard to what they are doing or will be doing to deal with the state capture inquiry report, satisfied or ticked the boxes, so to speak, because many people continued to ask the question that we've known about this. We know that this is what has happened, and we are where we are precisely because of the things you have outlined. But what we're saying is that things are not moving with the kind of speed that we expect them to. Of course, part of his answer to that was, the agencies that are dealing with these issues are independent, and they have to do their work without interference, without any fear or favor.
So we are dealing with an African National Congress that is literally an empty box, a promise based on the premise of history. And because we are dealing with an African National Congress that is an empty box, we are being asked constantly and consistently to buy into the brand values that the box represents. And there's a missing piece, which is we are at a point where it actually doesn't matter if it's Cyril Ramaphosa, if it's David Mabuza, if it's any of the hundreds of names that are being pandied about who wins in 2024. What is clear is that the ANC no longer exists as an ethical entity, and it can no longer be trusted by anybody who has their head screwed on straight and is actually has been paying attention. And what this means is that everything that is happening is simply, it's a kibutsu drama. It is about obfuscating, throwing curveballs, and keeping us so busy analyzing Phala, analyzing Zuma's briefing, analyzing Beki's speech, analyzing Kgalema Motlante's speech, analyzing all of these things, that we don't have the time to come back to the reality that South Africa is leaderless and our governing party is an empty box. And because we are dealing as I said earlier, with the runaway train of a political party wherein the leaders who have authority or they had some authority in the past they are telling us that they have no control over the level of corruption, the kind of personalities, and the patronage lines that exist. They are telling us this. So we need to listen to them, and we need to hear them, and we need to ask the question of what are we as South Africans going to do with the fact that the people who used to lead us no longer exist. And I think it's important that we have these electoral reforms, even though they're not at their best right now. But you have these electoral reforms that allow for independent candidates, that allow for all of these new and interesting changes, because it gives us the opportunity to try out something different. Because this that we have been trying for almost 30 years isn't working, hasn't worked, and will not work. So it doesn't matter if we find the most ethical person in the ANC, the one with the least cases against them, we are still going to end up exactly where we are right now, because the institution called the ANC is rotten at the core and is unable to turn around. That is why you have different, if you think about the ANC in general, by the time we are in November almost, right? We are like 6 days away from November. Normally, by the time you get to a conference of the ANC, you know the month ahead who are the top 2 contenders. Do we know at this point? We don't know. There's Cyril Ramaphosa, there's Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, there's Zweli Mkhize, there's Sisulu. There are so many people who are all contesting for this power. And while from a democratic perspective, it may look like we have a multiplicity of choices, we actually have 0 choices. And we as South Africans need to ask ourselves, how do we take back our country from this non-existent ANC? It has ceased to exist. We are simply looking at a brand name. That's what we are attaching our lives and our country to at this point.
Tessa, do you think that, the comments that all these presidents and ex-presidents made over the weekend will change, the ANC in terms of, over the next couple of months leading to the elective conference? Will these statements or positions that were taken, pronouncements that were made, change the way the ANC is going to conduct itself going into December?
No.
I've been saying to ANC members over the last year or two, that the ANC and its membership are at a point where they're having to make a decision between saving the country and saving the ANC. And a lot of the desperation you're seeing right now in terms of these public pleas from various quarters of the ANC is around saving the ANC. In fact, Mbeki has said a few times this year that if the ANC fails, the country fails. Again, as this appeal to ANC members for a sense of urgency, connecting the two fates. But what we need to remember is that the fate of the ANC does not need to be the fate of the country. That for the rest of us who are not inside the edifice of the ANC, we don't have to make the decision between whether we save the country or whether we save the ANC. And again, former President Kgalema Motlanthe has at another point in this year said, it may be good for the ANC to lose elections so that it has an opportunity to firstly to retreat from the busyness of governing or whatever it is that they are doing, in the pretense of governing in many cases.
Well, former President Thabo Mbeki has previously also said pretty much about how the death of the ANC may have serious implications for the country. The question I wanted to ask you, Tessa, is whether you actually subscribe to that view, whether you believe that.
I think there's merit to that in the sense that we do need to think as a country what happens when the ANC is no longer at the center of our politics and the center of power, because you don't want a power vacuum. And South Africans are as anxious in many cases for the ANC to not be at the center of power as they are about what happens if the ANC is not at the center of power. There's a fear attached to it. It's part of the reason why I think when people are not voting for the ANC, they rather stay at home because they don't want to be complicit in what comes next. But we need to have a conversation in society about what happens after the ANC is not at the center. What kind of politics do we need? What kind of coalition politics do we need to be institutionalizing and creating so that we're not afraid of the outcomes if the ANC and when the ANC is not at the center of power? Because we don't want to leave a void. You don't want to leave a vacuum. And we do want to take charge of that narrative. And that's what South Africans need to do. We need to take charge of what happens to the future and not feel like we're beholden to what happens in December. Because what the ANC decides in December will be what's good for the ANC. But that's not when the fate of the country gets decided. It doesn't get decided in December 2022. It gets decided in 2024 at the election. And that's where we, the people, get to decide. And we get to evaluate the ANC's choices alongside the choices of all other political options and political role players. But we must make a stance and say, between now and 2024, this is the kind of leadership that we want. These are the issues that we care about. This is the bar and the standard that we're setting for what it is we want in 2024. And whether it's the ANC or anybody else, these are the standards. They must be met or they will be hired and fired at our behest.
Prof. Aventessa says, so we as South Africans need to take charge. Do you think the pronouncements, the statements made and the discussions and conversations that followed what all these leaders had to say over the last couple of days will in any meaningful way enrich the conversations going forward?
Well, at some level, yes. But I think many people who are not part of the ANC or very close to the ANC sees it more as a dialogue within the ANC, but now in public, while in the past it was always within the ANC. So I think for some people, they don't regard this as part of the national debate. It's more debate about the ANC as a political party and its own future and how to try to rescue themselves. But I think where we are now, I personally believe we are already in a political transition era. And to a large extent, it started in 2016, slowly at metro level, 2021. Or 2019, we saw some of the changes, for example, in KwaZulu-Natal, where they lost about 10% of their votes. Last year, were local government. Again, the metros, there are 70 hung parliaments at local government level at the moment. Not all of them are coalitions. But that is already an indication of that the ANC as the dominant party from 1994 until 10 years or earlier on, we are moving away from that. It's inevitable. It has already happened and is already ongoing. The real question of 2024 is how far is it going to reach into the provincial level and the national level. So it's not as if it was a Kenya election where one president wins and the other one candidate is losing. It's more of a continuum that's of political parties that we have created for ourselves, and not voting for alternatives.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Let me thank all of my guests for being part of this conversation. Of course, we're going to leave you with former President Kgalema Motlanthe defending the former president's right to express their views and speak their minds. Have a good night. Take a listen.
They are perfectly within their rights to express their most honest view on any matter of concern or interest to them, and we have to respect that, and we have to defend their right to do so. And I'm not in a position to be the one, making a moral judgment on this question.